Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Podcast. I am here with my friend, fellow blogger, and hopefully he will start his own podcast soon because I think it would be absolutely incredible. He's the most believable man that I know, Jon D. Harrison. How are you doing, Jon?
I'm doing great, Ellery. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I got my coffee here, and I'm ready to go.
Awesome. I've got my coffee on this end too, so let's do it.
What do you put in your coffee, Jon? You black or do you do cream or all that?
Yeah, I'm doing the bulletproof coffee. I'll give you
with the butter.
Yeah. So it's got grass-fed butter. It's got high MCT coconut oil, and it's made from high-altitude organic coffee beans. So I'm getting extra fancy here.
I was first introduced to bulletproof coffee when I interviewed. His name was just in my head. He's married to Amy Clover, Rick Mulready, and since then it's been everywhere. How did you finally decide, hey, I'm going to put butter in my coffee? What was that about?
I think it's too many mornings waking up at 5 a.m. and saying, okay, I got to get something else on my side. I was willing to give it a try. The truth is, it's because my wife and I got one of those new blenders. We got one of those Vitamix blenders, and if you ever pick up one of these high-end blenders, it turns into this weird idea of, well, let's see what we can actually blend.
Let's blend everything.
And you just go around and start blending stuff. It's like a deep fryer. Once you get it up and going, you just want to see what you can fry. So I started seeing what I could blend, and I started looking up coffee recipes, and this one surfaced pretty quick from the Bulletproof Executive website, and the idea of dumping butter into your coffee at first seemed a bit frightening, but I did a little research on it, read up a bit, and I think even Chris Liccardo had a podcast episode where he mentioned this, more so along the coconut oil edition. I said, you know what, let's give this a shot.
And
I'm a convert. One
really?
Yeah, every day, and I only need to do about 20 ounces of it, and literally I got the whole day set, no caffeine dropout, and I like the taste.
Does it taste a whole lot different than it would without the butter and the oil and stuff?
You know, the very first time I did it, I think I overdid it on the butter and the oil. So you can imagine that slick of oil coming off a coffee when you first sip it is a bit off-putting. But since I finally fine-tuned it a bit, I love it. And the butter really jumps in for what cream or milk would do. So it's pretty natural when you get used to it.
Did you put cream or milk in it before?
Yes, I did.
See, I've always drank my coffee black. I like the taste. So I don't know if bulletproof would be for me. Didn't you do something on your blog about bulletproof coffee a while back?
You know, actually, that was demoing the Aerobi AeroPress, the coffee maker.
Oh, that's right. So not quite the same thing.
Well, and that's a key ingredient in my my little routine that I use to put it together. But that would probably be the best coffee maker that $25 will get you.
Awesome. Well, speaking of your blog, I didn't mean that to be just the perfect segue, but it will work for us. You've been blogging for a long time, and in fact, that's how you and I met. What was that, like 16, 17 months?
At least.
No.
Longer than that.
Yeah, it's probably been the full 2 years or so, because it was about that time when I met Jared, and I had sort of met you, if you will, much before that. So right. You're a blogger. You are changing your gears to rebrand, and I want to touch on that for a second, or in a second. But you're also thinking about starting a podcast. Have you put more thought into doing that, or is that still a maybe someday kind of thing?
Well, you know what? It depends when this airs, but as of Friday,
I like where this is going.
Today's a Monday. As of Friday, I have submitted to Stitcher and iTunes a podcast. So it is out there. I'm waiting approval, and it's going to be bite-sized at first. I'm not ready for the high-quality marathons you're pulling. It'll be more of a sprint. So we're going to budget about 10 minutes per an episode for that. But it's out there, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to start asking people to leave me a 5-star rating and share with their friends.
That's awesome. So what's it called?
It's going to be called Classically Trained.
Awesome. Just like in your blog is now classicallytrained.net, right?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Perfect. And again, I want to talk about that here in just a second, but tell us why, man, and if it was just arm twisting and coercion, you can skip that part. But why did you start a podcast?
Well, there's a lot of ways to answer that. It's the
insert the arm twisting.
Yes, arm twisting was the final shove that got me off the ledge, and that's in no small part to you and again our good mutual friend Jared Easley. But eventually, I knew it was going that route. Part of what I've done in my day job, part of throughout looking at just my skill set, I've done a lot of public speaking. I teach classes and share with leaders in a very public way quite often. And so it's just a natural medium for me. In fact, when I go to draft blog post ideas, I'll speak it out first before I even get to sitting down and writing out the content. So that's just kind of a natural medium for me to communicate through. But I started getting envious of you and a lot of others who have just created something that is incredibly helpful. It's very digestible, and it also gives an opportunity to share your voice in a way that the written form just doesn't quite embody. So it's the medium, it's the ease of sharing and access to others, and it's again looking to play at some of the strengths that I have once I've gotten this technical piece ironed out, which was, in all honesty, a lot less intimidating than anyone out there probably thinks it is. I think you might have a little guide to help him get started, actually.
I do. I was just thinking that I didn't want to throw out the shameless plug, but you're right. It's podcasting. Whenever I looked at it, so this is the beginning-ish of August 2014, and I started. I think I released my first episode in the middle, like November 15th of 2013. But before that, I was like, "Holy crap! What I thought it had to be super technical. I didn't know at all what I'm doing or what I was doing, and I don't want to say I still don't, but I still don't use a mixer and some of those really, really high-tech stuff. So I'm glad that didn't prevent you from sharing a really cool message with the world and in a really cool medium. I have to ask, though, because I've had bloggers on the show before. I've had people of varying skill levels of speaking ability, if you will, and you come across as very, very, is well-spoken the right word? Where did you come up with this? Because speaking publicly or behind a microphone to an empty room it took me a long time before I got comfortable staring at a wall and talking to myself. And you're doing a great job. I know there's going to be somebody out there who's like, well, I can't speak. I don't understand it. I'm not comfortable talking to an empty room. How did you develop those skills, Jon? And again, I want to talk about some of the other things about the blog and everything too. But how did you prepare yourself for becoming a podcaster? I think that'd be a very interesting story.
Oh yeah, that's a fantastic question. Well, obviously, I'm still working through a lot of it because, you hit a good point. When you stand up in front of a room of 50 or 200 people, you have this ability to make the eye contact. You have the body language in play. You have a lot of other ways of communicating. And
the adrenaline, too.
Oh, sure. But the biggest gift you get from a live audience is the immediate feedback. I mean, you can look and you can see if people are connecting, if they're nodding their head, if they're checking out. And that's a great cue that if you're paying attention on the fly, you can say, okay, time to move on. Or maybe I need to spend a little more time with this space and this is connecting. So let me move to this side of the room because people here are really seeming to connect with it. And you have a great feedback tool as a gift. And that's the first thing I noticed was absent when I decided to set up a mic and start
talking. It's like a vacuum.
Right. Right. And it's, I don't know if you've ever been in the scenario where you've got some headphones in and you're talking into a mic and you hear your own voice. In that scenario, at first, it's a bit terrifying. It's almost as if you can't even begin to think your way through a sentence. So as I began practicing, I realized the best thing I could do to help me out was think about it more of as a conversation. Because I don't know, tell me, maybe you're this way. When you listen to a podcast, do you see yourself as in a one-on-one conversation with this person, or how do you connect when you listen?
Whenever I listen to a podcast, honestly, I don't picture myself as sitting at the same table with them really. It's more of a passive thing, kind of like listening to an audiobook.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's how I perceive it. But when I do podcasts and you and I are having this conversation, I want the listener, and this is kind of like breaking the fourth wall in theater, but I'm not doing a good job of that right now. But I want the listener to think, okay, well, there's the two of them, and I'm the third person sitting at the same table with them. So, and here's the fourth wall. And if you're listening to this, I want you to feel like you are sitting at the same table with Jon and I, and it's a conversation. And I try to ask questions that I think the audience would want to know the answer to. So that's how I do it. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's no this greenish wall is not giving me any feedback at all.
Well, yeah, and that's the big challenge. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could literally say, just, hey, stop, listen for a second. I know you're sitting in your car listening to this podcast. I just want to let you know the next thing that's coming up is for you. And wouldn't it be great to be able to tailor content like that? So what we need to do, and what I've done is I've worked on trying to find a way to think about what is the individual going through that's facing some of the challenges I'm hoping to share solutions to. And so I'm trying to think about them, or think about someone I know who this would help, and think about them almost by their face or their name, so that I personify the message a bit more. Because I notice when I don't do this, it comes across like reading a book. And that gets kind of boring, and I don't think that has the opportunity to drive the engagement. So really, if you want to know what my mission is, to answer your original question, is to try to be thinking about specific individuals and as if I'm speaking to them.
That works. Are you going to do interviews, or are you going to do more solo shows?
I've got a mix of both. I am thrilled. I already have a couple interviews completed that I'm very excited about. I don't know that I hit the topic yet. What I'm focused on is life and leadership lessons that are learned from video games. And that creates a great opportunity to reach out to both leadership experts who happen to like video games, or maybe not like them. And because, who wants to hear the same side that we all agree on? That controversy is fun. But then there's also the opportunity to reach out to leaders, executives, higher-ups, or even professionals in the video game industry, in the video game world, and ask them the same sort of questions and try to get a sense of, what are the principles that are in common? Because here's what I know. Principles exist. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a video game, if you're talking about a movie, if you're talking about a book, a play, or even a conversation or a workplace. There are principles. And the key is, how do we unwrap those principles, find out what's in common, what's universal, and how do we learn that, and then translate it back to whatever it is we want to do.
I like that. As someone who played video games since I could hold not a Super Nintendo, the SNES.
Yep, Super Nintendo. Yes.
Yeah. As someone who could play since I could hold a controller, I definitely appreciate that you're bringing up that you can learn a lot from video games. And even, well, I don't know if it's more so today or they're just more complex, but you learn a lot more in addition to just hand-eye coordination. And we'll talk about this further in a second. Problem solving, strategy, multitasking as much as we can, multitask, but keeping track of multiple things. Right. And but you can learn a lot in addition to those. And let's come back to that, Jon. Sure. But I want to talk really quick about why you made the shift, because for everyone listening, I met Jon, like we were just saying, about 2 years ago on his blog, jondharrison.com, which is going away, but it's being transitioned into something new. And Jon has a really interesting story about why he rebranded. Mm-hmm. And if you've been following me for a long time, I rebranded too, but my reasoning and my why behind that is completely different from Jon's. So Jon, tell us why you are moving from jondharrison.com to classicallytrained.net.
Sure, love to. So this transition, this change took place earlier this year. It was back, I would say, perhaps it was around February or March that this happened. The idea was conceived in early February. And let me talk about how the idea came about. So I'd been blogging for a while on the site you mentioned, jondharrison.com, and my motto was helping you succeed. And I talked about a variety of different leadership lessons that professionals can apply to their daily life. And I began to realize this is a very crowded space. And if you've spent any time out there on internet business and even real business outside of that, I don't want to say real business, but I mean like physical business, what you begin to realize is that if you don't have something that sets you apart, that makes you stand out or give you a unique competitive advantage, you just get lost. I mean, that's what Michael Hyatt talks about with platform in his book. There's this idea of standing out and getting above the rest. So how do you do that? And so I started looking at myself, and I started saying, okay, I've done my best to incorporate my own voice, my own personality in my website, and I've told things that are of interest to me and helpful for others. And I was getting traction, but I was feeling like something was missing. So I said, okay, let me just start writing down everything that I'm good at. Let me write my skills. Let me write out my hobbies. Let me write out my interests and look at the ones I've had the most time and passion invested into. And I realized that I have over a decade of time spent in the leadership development, organizational development world. I've got a vast library of books that I'm always adding to.
And that's what you do in your day job,
yes,
right?
Yeah. That's my my 8 to 5:30, 8 to 6 job, working in this space where I'm able to interact with leaders and coach them and provide tips and techniques to be successful. And then on the other hand, I've got this collection of a few thousand video games that range all the way from, current generation, looking at some of the older systems. I have an old Pong system, a Magnavox, Atari 2600. So going back to the 70s, and I've got, like I said, literally thousands of games across these systems. And I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if those two worked together somehow? And I sat there for a second, and I said, you know what? I think they do. And so I thought to myself, what if I take these games, these ideas that are in the games, and rather than trying to say the game will teach you, what if I just simply said, let's connect the dots. Let's find a way to create an allegory out of it. And I quickly came up on a piece of paper. I wrote out probably the idea, just the title, for about 20 different blog posts almost instantly, right off the top of my head. Taking the 7 habits of highly effective people in Covey's work and comparing it up to video games and looking at Tetris and connecting that to David Allen's getting things done methodology of time management. And I mean, it just kept coming. I'm like, there's so much here. Why not? So that morning, the idea occurred to me at around 6 a.m., went out, found the domain, bought it, and set the stake in the ground. And here I am today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this, Jon, because when you were sharing with me why you made the shift, I was really intrigued and wanted to share your reasoning, your thought process behind doing that. And I want to share that with people listening to the episode, because I feel like we get so stuck in a routine, or this is the way that I've always done it, or it would be a huge chore to move a blog, one blog to another, or one website to another, or just changing jobs. And when you said I wasn't getting whatever I wasn't getting, but I wanted to, what did you say? It was like, I want to combine my passion with what I've been trained to do, or something like, and that's powerful to me, and I wish more people would do that, and that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on the show today.
Well, and you know what? To add to that, here's one of the things that had held me back. Let me talk about what held me back for so long. Is this idea that video games as a hobby have this bad reputation, this idea that it's a waste of time, that it's not the first thing you think of when you think of highly productive leaders or managers. You say, oh boy, he's a video game player, and you get this bad reputation, this bad stereotype of waste of time, and at worst extreme, you think it's going to inspire violence, and so we have this bad impression. And part of it is I wanted to redeem that. The other part was, is I realized that there are people out there like you, people out there like Joe Lalonde, and even some of these other folks I've met in the blogging world that also happen to be gamers as well as interested in leadership. And I'm like, so these two exist in more than just me. I'm not the only one who's experiencing this hobby and this drive and desire to be there for others and to look after them and lead them. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to really find a niche market that's a lot like me. I mean, I thought, what would I would love more than to learn about leadership while learning about video games? So that's really another thing. If you're thinking about your audience, think about the things that are interesting to you, because that will provide you with this unlimited source of fuel, of passion for what you're doing when you get up early or stay up late.
That's perfect, and we should do that more often. We should write about on our blogs. We should talk about on our podcasts, whatever medium that we have that we are using to share our message. If it's interesting to us, most likely it's going to be interesting to our audience. We're not generally going to read or listen to people we completely disagree with, although Rush Limbaugh would probably disagree with that statement. He gets a lot of haters. But, most of the people who pay attention to what we're doing also like similar things, maybe not 100%, but 60, 75%. And we should share more about what's interesting to us, because it will also be interesting to our audience. And you and I've talked about this several times, or at least a few times, John, about how, like you said, there seems to be this negative connotation about video games, even though they've been around for 30 or 40 years. Right. And but a few just psycho people ruin it for everybody. I mean, well, I don't even want to use that analogy. I would use it if we weren't recording right now. but I mean, you get these crazy people that ruin it for everybody. Sure. And I've told people this before. I grew up playing the most violent video games out there. I grew up playing Doom and blowing people up, and Call of Duty and all of those things. And I don't know if I want to say I turned out fine, but I turned out fine. I mean, I don't know if you grew up playing Doom and Wolfenstein and all those too, John, but did you? Let me ask. I don't know.
You know what? I did have exposure to a lot of those. I've played many of them. It's funny because I think a lot of the research and the news articles that are out there are based around sensationalism, which is something you see with any news article. I mean,
they want to get to the front page.
Sure. And you hear this weird thing about a piece of plastic from a Lifesavers container causing a child to choke. And, the same thought process would cause people to run out there and ban hard candies and write them up as, this evil thing. And we have to remember what we hear in the media, and what's there is designed, it's the equivalent of clickbait, right? They're just trying to get people to listen and pay attention. And it always catch that this is something that can be very harmful. But I won't deny the fact that there are some challenges. There are some things that I believe violent video games, if nothing else, is getting stuff in your mind that isn't necessarily the best. But to dismiss an entire media simply because there are a few games that are exhibiting the worst of us. The fact is, the games didn't come up with the idea. There were people creating those games, and those same people could just as easily be writing books or making movies. And trust me, as much as violent video games got bad raps in the 90s, when you compare to what was happening in the movie scene at the same time, it doesn't even come close to the impact that those sort of movies could have on a person sitting and just watching.
Scarface? I couldn't even make it through that movie. I mean, you make a very good point, because I want to drive really fast after playing Forza or Grand Theft Auto, and wish I had a cannon on top of my car like in Twisted Metal. This is some of those games, and part of it. And I might turn the passion up here, because one of the things that really pisses me off is when I haven't been to a GameStop in a while. I usually buy from Best Buy, just a little side note. But I see these in this example, it was a mom. I'm sure dads do it too, but she was buying this kid he came up to her waist, and she was buying him. Oh, I think it might have been a Call of Duty or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it's rated. I don't know if people don't understand the rating system or not. I'm a big fan of video games as a form of art, and we can talk about that if you want to, John. But I don't know that people really understand why a game might be rated R. And if this same mom who's buying her 11-year-old a rated R game is probably the same mom that bitches about it being violent. If I had to guess, I don't know that for a fact, but.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point there. I'm a parent and I have a son. He's only 3, and it's really important for parents to be involved. I'm not looking to place blame or anything, but what I will point out is you bring up an interesting idea that ultimately parents have an obligation to be involved with their children, to know what's going on and to connect with them. And that sometimes means making a hard call, saying, you know what, this isn't good for you. I mean, I can tell you a story. My dad did this to me. I remember being, I'm trying to think how old I was at the time. I might have been 13 at the time when the original Mortal Kombat came out. And it was funny because it came out, they did all these ports of it. They did this big campaign. They called it Mortal Monday. Still remember it. Clever marketing. And so the game came out, and Nintendo took a very hard stance. They were very, very into censorship at the time. And it's funny, some of the stuff they've censored was just bizarre, but other things made sense. So Nintendo had censored their version of Mortal Kombat. They took the blood out of the game, and they replaced it with sweat, which is really funny because it was the same animation. It just wasn't red. It was gray. And so you have this kind of sanitized version, which, by the way, Sega on the Genesis sales because they kept the blood in the game. And that was their big selling point, which is funny when you look back at it. If you look at the original Mortal Kombat game and you look at what was considered graphic, you'll laugh. But this made a big deal. This ended up. And so I remember talking to my dad. I told my dad I wanted to buy the game, and I asked his permission for it. And I remember the conversation with him. He said, he asked me about it, what I thought about it. And I really, through this conversation, realized that, as a 13-year-old, I didn't really think that was a good idea. And I kind of listened to what he had to say, and I allowed him to influence me a bit too. But we realized that it really wasn't in line with my beliefs, and we were able to talk through it. And my dad and I remember even though he didn't care about them a whole lot, it wasn't his hobby, he would still play these games with me. And so that level of connection and that level of relationship is really key, I think, for parents out there when it comes to their concerns related to what their kids are seeing, whether it's music, whether it's video games, or whether it's TV. It's a parent's prerogative to have that level of involvement. So I think this is sad that our whole society is interested in finger pointing and blame, because too often it's very hard to stop and look in the mirror and say, okay, well, this is a reality. What can I do? What can I do to change it? So I think that's where we need to come back to, is worry less about the finger pointing, a bit more about how do we make a difference for what we believe in. Yeah, and do you have you? I can't remember what we talked about the other day. Did you get a PS4 or a Xbox One? I'm on the fence there. I'm able to be enticed if there's anyone who really would like to support the cause. But as it stands today, I've my next gen console is a Nintendo 3DS handheld, and that's kept me plenty busy with some really awesome games on that system. So
I hear you.
Yeah, I haven't jumped yet. I'm not ready to commit, but we'll see.
Well, the reason why I had asked that is kind of the big game a couple months ago was Watch Dogs.
Yes,
and this is going to be maybe an interesting topic for you, because there's a fair amount of nudity in that game. Mm-hmm. And this is where it gets kind of fun. I'm glad that there is, and I'm not glad that for the sake of there being topless females in the game, but I'm glad there is, because someone is pushing the limits of what the medium can do. If you can have that stuff in a movie or in a painting or talk about it in a song, I fully believe that video games are as much, if not more so, an art form than some of these other things. So if you can have it in those mediums, I think you should be able to have it in video games. Again, I'm not for it for the sake of nudity or for the sake of violence, but I'm for it because it pushes the medium beyond where it's been for the last 20 or 30 years. Your thoughts on that, Jon?
Well, first of all, that sort of content has been in games since the late 70s.
But it's more so
think
now,
think about what Pac-Man looks like and then make the translation. You'll realize it wasn't that much of a concern at that point because of the limitations of that. But
sure.
But let's revisit what you're really asking about. In regards to that topic, here's where I think the positive can come of that, and it rides off of just that last question I was talking about. If this causes the parents or the adults in individuals' lives to kind of stand up and pay attention and realize, hold on, we need to have some conversations here. We need to get involved. Then I think from a guiding principle, that makes sense. In regards to those of us who are, in that range where we're no longer under 18 or we're no longer in, that situation where our parents' opinion is the guiding principle, I think it's a sign to us that we need to proceed with caution and think about our decisions that we make and our choices we make. Yeah. Again, that what I mentioned earlier, remember, there are people making these games. The games themselves aren't responsible for the content or the product that's produced. So as individuals find their voice, as they find their niche, and as they find what it is that they want to communicate to the world and create messaging, then you can expect to see a wide variety. And so I think the gaming industry will benefit from an expanded horizon when it comes to storytelling. But what it gains the criticism mostly for is maturity. And I think we're starting to see that change. Mature content does not lead to a mature game, though. And so we have to be careful not to confuse the two. So as long as we continue to see growth in the writing, as long as we continue to see growth in some, you see recently some very famous actors have actually gotten involved with gaming projects. Kevin Spacey, for instance, Kiefer Sutherland. We see bigger names and bigger voices looking at this particular form of media. So I think it will continue to grow and evolve, and this is just part of those growing pains.
Yeah, I as we have definitely established, we're both fans of video games, and I'm really glad that you have kind of made this transition. You've made this. I don't know if you would use the word evolution or not, but you've evolved your leadership blog. I wanted to say vanilla leadership blog, but that doesn't sound quite right either. You had a really good leadership blog, but you're putting more of your passion and what you enjoy into it, and it inspires me to put more of myself into my writing, into the podcast episodes that I do. And you're proving that, as someone listening to this, you're proving that you can merge what you've been trained to do with what you love to do. And it's really encouraging to me to see your success. Now, before I ask my standard questions, Jon, have you seen, as far, and you can dodge this question if you want to, or if it's a little bit too behind the curtain, let me know. But have you seen an increased traffic or traction since you've done the rebrand, or is it maybe too short, or is it still in a transition process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I'll tell you is that in the first 3 months of operating under my new site, under classicallytrained.net, I saw traffic that exceeded what I had achieved in 1 year on my other site. And now some of those were people that chose to follow over, that continued, but the majority of them were about connecting with a new audience. And there were also some other strategies that I had learned that I was able to employ. And then there was, that good old element called luck that you can go out there and that you can create for yourself. So it kind of was a couple things coming together. But the traction's been enormous. The opportunities have also been enormous. And I've just really felt at home in the new change.
Awesome. Are you using Google Analytics to track all that?
I am, yes.
That's the technical side of me coming out there. And Jon, being on the Empowered podcast or being a guest here, you might have guessed we would talk about the word empowered like we usually do. What does the word empower mean to you?
Well, I am going to, as might be predictable, think about
level up.
Yeah, I'm going to level up here. I'm going to use some video game vernacular in that. And I think about empowered. I think about control. I think that video game players are empowered to impact their gaming world by receiving things like power-ups and special techniques and special knowledge. And so for me, when I think about empowered, I think about the ability to make a difference and having the tools to do so in a way that suits the person looking to make that difference.
You know, you just gave me an interesting mental picture, Jon, in a video game, and my wife Ashley will probably be editing this, and she's played a lot of Borderlands with me. And when anyone plays a video game, we will spend hours trying to get an extra hat or, you know, the perfect cape but why in the world do we not spend that same amount of time leveling up in our own lives? Why do we not spend, 12 hours reading a book that'll give us an additional bit of knowledge or additional bit of skill, but we'll sit there and we'll beat our heads against a wall trying to beat a dragon or, whatever. You just gave me that mental picture, and I think that's an interesting way of putting it. So that's a very unique answer, but I'm already loving it.
Well, Ellery, let me ask you this. Do you want me to answer that question you just asked?
Sure.
So the reason why we do this in games and we tend not to do it outside of us is I think there's three things that stand out in my mind. The first of them is there's a clarity of a goal. When we're in a game, it's usually pretty unambiguous. Defeat this dragon, interact with this, NPC, this, computer character, beat this level, defeat this boss. There's not a lot of ambiguity. You don't have to guess who the boss is. You get it to the end and the screen doesn't go anymore. That's it. So there's a lack of ambiguity. The other thing that happens is we get a lot of feedback. You get immediate feedback. You press the controller, your character moves. You stop pressing and the movement stops. We have sound effects. We have a lot of different things going on that give us feedback. Modern games give you like a GPS many times where you'll see, am I heading the right direction or not? You know very fast if you're doing the right thing or you're not. And then lastly, this idea of a reward at the end. You mentioned it. It's proof that we've accomplished something. And the truth is, we get a new hat, we get a new cape, we get a new costume. You can equip that immediately. You get a new weapon, you can start using it and see the impact of what you've done on the world around you. Meanwhile, when we show up to work, we don't always have that clear goal. Our leaders haven't really spelled it out for us. When we start working on a task, we don't get that feedback immediately. It might be a year before we get a performance review to know if we're even on track. And then lastly, we don't always get rewarded for the work that we do. In fact, we see others get rewarded. We do the same thing and the reward doesn't happen. And that's not necessarily something that's easy to fix because management can't always be consistent or organizations can't always be consistent in rewarding the good and penalizing the bad. But I think there's something inside us that crave those three elements. And video games do a great job of meeting them in a way that gives us immediate satisfaction. The real world has got a way to go.
I think if this is a taste of what's going to be on your podcast, Jon, you're going to knock it out of the park because that what you said, the summary is absolutely incredible, and I think it's of extreme value. And you might have already answered this question, but I want to ask it just so I make sure. But how do we add those things to our life? If we can't count on our leaders or our bosses, maybe we can count on leaders, but we can't count necessarily on bosses if we separate those two things. How can we add that stuff to our lives, or how can I add it when I don't have a boss? I sit in my home office or out on my porch or on the couch in the living room working for myself. How do I add those kinds of things to my life or my environment or my day to make me more successful?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I hate that I asked that question. I hate that we're getting this at towards the very end, but I think it's so valuable. I'll skip a few other questions and spend time on this if we can.
Okay, so ways that we can do that. There's a kind of a subset out there, and many of your listeners might have heard of this. It's called gamification. And gamification has really kind of a bad rap currently, just like video games have kind of this reputation. When you hear gamification, I don't know, what do you think, Ellery, when you hear gamification?
Adding game aspects to like a point system, maybe when you're trying to get your kid to do chores or something, you get points for doing tasks at work. That's how I see it.
Sure,
I guess.
sure. And so for that reason, it becomes a bit of this buzzword, right? It becomes this next, latest, greatest concept of how do we engage the workforce and how do we get Gen Y to show up on time and give their effort. And it unfortunately becomes a bit played out in a way that isn't helpful. I mean, at its core, and trust me, I am no gamification expert. There are some incredibly talented individuals out there that really know about this space. So if you do a little research, there's some great stuff out there. Just as an aside, Jane McGonigal is an author who wrote a book called Reality is Broken, and she has 2 TED Talks out there. One of them is about how video games can add 10 years to your life. And she talks about some of these ideas. And
I'm going to live to 200 then.
Yeah, go for it. So where we start with this is looking at what gamification really is. And it's looking at those principles and elements within video games that make them successful, that make them interesting, that make them something we stick with, and that make them something we tolerate, because video games are work that we're choosing to do still. I think that's a quote from Jane McGonigal, actually. She talked about it being voluntary work. And so we look at our work, and I think the biggest thing that we can take away from it is something you described, and it's something that I've pointed out in video games on my website, is that I remember this old game Ninja Gaiden, and I played it on the original Nintendo. There's a modern version of it, but the old school original Nintendo version, I think it was either late 80s, early 90s, it was incredibly hard. It was just crushingly difficult. And you're this ninja, you run around, you've got a sword, you've got shurikens, you're killing people left and right. And you get to this one stage where you're jumping among cliffs, and there are these hawks that are flying in the air that if you jump, they dive bomb and knock you right out of the air. You go uncontrolled, you fall down a pit, you're dead. So you're this killing machine that's highly trained, and you get taken out by a bird. And I can't tell you, I think I probably broke 2-3 controllers on that one game, that one stage, just out of frustration. But what I realized is that I can't change the fact that a bird can swoop down and take me out. What I can change is how I respond to that particular situation. I can look at what my span of control is. So let's translate this to work. When we are in a situation where maybe we have a boss that doesn't see things the way we do, and maybe for whatever reason we feel is either career limiting or just doesn't get it, we need to stop worrying about them and whether they're getting it or not, whether they're developing themselves, whether they're performing as a leader or not. And what we need to focus on is ourselves and ask, well, what can I do differently? How can I approach this differently? Maybe this situation will never change. How can I overcome it? And when we start asking questions like that, we start getting better answers, and we start getting a little clarity around how we can drive those outcomes. And the same is true for the entrepreneur. The same is true for the solopreneur who sits at home and says, this is huge. How do I stay motivated? Well, ask yourself, what's the thing I can start working on right now that'll make a difference? And when we get into motion and we start taking action, the next actions tend to follow one after another until we're able to start getting enough momentum to really begin to work on vision. But the funny thing about vision is if you're so focused on the high level, you're never going to get any work done. So you have to be able to adapt between looking at the big map and taking action. And I found that if you start with taking some action, it's a lot easier to get the big picture in place rather than trying to do it the other way around.
And I think for me, just something that I've been going through lately is I have to, instead of having like 100 blog drafts that some are just titles, some are outlines, I need to finish one to completion and get it ready and scheduled in advance, because just having a list of topics in half-formed ideas, to me, that's almost demotivating. Like I have nothing to show for my work. And as someone who works in the same room by myself all day, you get to the end of the day when your spouse comes home and you're like, what did I do today? But if you can get those markers, like you're saying, get those blog posts scheduled out, get that podcast, not 10 of them edited halfway, but finish something, whatever you're working on, finish one thing to completion. And so that you can say, I finished this today. I finished this today, or these 3 things today, instead of I worked partially on, and that's a big thing for me, because that's kind of this what did I do today kind of mentality. Before my last question, I want to share a quote, and you might have heard this, John, and I'm going to badly paraphrase, but the saying is, don't wish for things to be easier, wish for you to be better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really applicable to what you just said. John, what was the last movie you saw?
Last movie I saw, actually last night, my wife and I just rented Heaven is for Real. So that was just last night.
How was it?
It was good. It was definitely producing some conversation amongst us. So.
Also, we saw Need for Speed, and I would actually recommend that. Actually, as a gamer, you probably played that, and
yes.
And the movie was quite good as well. All of the stunts were actually real, no CGI, which was kind of interesting, but a topic for another day. John, here's my final question. What is one tip or piece of advice that you can give people who are just starting out, maybe just starting to look at podcasting, maybe thinking about starting a blog, or maybe even looking at rebranding something that they already have? What tip or piece of advice would you have for that person?
As a recovering perfectionist, the big challenge here is you got to get out there and try stuff. That's what makes video games great, is that you can make experiments, you can try out new ideas, and you can do it in a way that's safe. If you can't overcome a certain level in a game, you just start trying different ways of beating that level. And try things and see what works. If you are looking to accomplish something, whether it's starting a website, the best thing you do is get it up there and tinker around with it, build that momentum like I talked about earlier, and get going with it. Because the truth is we all suck at first. The very first time we do anything, we're not going to be an expert at it. So give that up, live with it, but don't let that stop you, because the person who has made an effort and has created a bad product is far, far ahead than the person who has all these great ideas and hasn't moved a muscle. So action is what you got to take.
Awesome. That's a great way to end the show, John. If someone wanted to thank you for being on the show today and reach out to you and connect, where can we send them?
You can reach me at classicallytrained.net, and I have a contact form there, or you can just email me directly at Jon, Jon, at classicallytrained.net, and then you can find me on Twitter. It's CT_blog.
Perfect. Well, John, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I can't wait to see you again.
Likewise. It was my pleasure.
John is such a cool guy. When Ashley, my wife, was editing this, she said, I think she may be a little bit biased about having some favorite episodes, but she said that she really enjoyed this one because of good audio quality and the rapport that Jon had Jon and I had together, rather. And I think that is absolutely true. Jon and I have known each other for quite a while, and we met online. And so many people that I connect with these days, I met online, and the stigma or this kind of weird, creepy factor of, I think so many people remember AOL chat rooms and going in and, things are a little bit weird. That's not really the case anymore. And if you are thinking about doing an online business or looking at connecting with people online because you can't find people in your local area to do business with or to connect over similar topics, go online, search Facebook, or reach out to some people, because the world is not necessarily a scary place. And just like Grant Cardone says, strangers have all the things that we want in life. And whether it's a euchre group that you can hang out with and play games with on Wednesdays, or online business entrepreneurs and you're stuck up in Maine, or you're just looking to connect with like-minded people and you can't really find people in your area, go online and you might be really surprised at what you think. But speaking of online, I want to talk about offline for a second. I am in the process of recording interviews to help you create live local meetup groups. I'm in the process of starting one, and I'm learning from experts who have incredible meetups. I just got through talking to Lou Mongello, who works with meetups in and around the Walt Disney World area. He goes on cruises with these people, and it's just, meetups are a great way to connect with your audience, connect with like-minded people. You don't even have to be the authority to bring people together, but you'll be seen as an authority. So if you're in the North Austin area, or you feel like driving to Round Rock, Saturday, November the 1st, from 7 to 9 p.m. at the La Madeleine. It's at 1431 and I-35. It's exit 256 in Round Rock, Texas. Come out, meet other real people, take the online relationship and bring it offline, and it'll be the Online Entrepreneurs of North Austin meetup. I want to see you there. I'd love to connect with you there. Just shake your hand, give you a hug or something. I already have 2 fantastic speakers lined up. One talks about cash cars, and he's been featured at FinCon. He spoke at New Media, or spoke at Podcast Movement. He spoke at Podcast Dallas. He spoke in Florida. Another speaker that I'm going to have talk to us about mindset. She has been doing online business for a very long time, and she's making a lot of money adding value to people and making a difference in the lives of other people. So if you would like, go to onlineentrepreneurssna.com. That's online entrepreneursna, like northaustin.com. You can register with Eventbrite or Meetup. It's completely free. I want you to be there. I want to meet you and connect with you, and I'd love to see you there. Stay tuned to empoweredpodcast.com. If you're not subscribed, all of the links are there. Make sure you subscribe and download all of these episodes, because in the next couple of months, I'm going to be releasing this series about how you can create successful live online meetups. And I want you to get that value and learn from the guests that I've had on the show. I want you to learn just like I'm learning. I'm not the expert, but that's the cool thing about podcasting. I'm going to learn from the experts. Thank you for tuning into this episode. I'm your host, Ellery Wells. I hope you like my new graphic. It should be going out here pretty soon. You should see the new podcast logo. Let me know what you think. We'll see you next time.